The unexpected moment. The night sky over Los Angeles shimmered with golden lights as Hollywood's most awaited charity gala began. Cameras flashed like lightning, and whispers spread through the crowd when Keanu Reeves stepped out of his car. He wore a simple black suit. No flashy accessories, no entourage. The reporters noticed how calm he looked, how grounded he seemed amid all the chaos. But what they didn't know was that tonight, something deeply personal was about to unfold. Something that would make the world talk for weeks. Inside the grand ballroom, laughter echoed and glasses clinked as stars from every corner of Hollywood gathered. It had been years since Keanu attended an event of this scale. He had come only because the charity supported children who had lost parents, something close to his heart. He quietly greeted a few old friends, then moved toward a quiet corner. His eyes wandered, scanning the crowd without really looking. And then, like a sudden pull of fate, he saw her, Sandra Bullock. She was standing across the hall, her silver dress catching the warm light. She looked as graceful as ever, confident yet gentle. Keanu froze for a moment, caught between nostalgia and disbelief. They hadn't seen each other in almost a decade. Their last meeting had been brief, friendly, but distant. They had both moved on with their lives, or so everyone thought. But now, as their eyes met across the crowd, time seemed to stop. For a second, they just stared, silent, unsure. Then Sandra smiled, the kind of smile that carried years of shared laughter, movie sets, and late-night talks about life and kindness. Keanu took a slow breath and began walking toward her. Each step felt heavier than the last, filled with memories of a friendship that had once been pure and unspoken. Cameras turned, flashes began, and whispers filled the room. Are they talking again? Is this real? When he finally reached her, Sandra turned fully to face him. Hey, stranger, she said softly. Keanu smiled back. Hey, yourself. The warmth in his voice carried more than words. It carried gratitude, relief, and something neither of them could quite name. For a few minutes, they talked quietly, away from the noise. She told him about her recent projects, about life, about how much she admired what he had done with his time. He listened, really listened, his eyes kind and steady. It wasn't about fame or nostalgia. It was about two souls reconnecting after years of distance. But the peace didn't last long. As they spoke, a journalist approached, eager to capture the moment. Keanu, Sandra, can we get a quote about your reunion? The question hung in the air like an unwelcome interruption. Sandra hesitated, unsure how to respond. Keanu gave a polite smile. We're just catching up, he said calmly. But even as he said it, he could feel the tension rising around them. Cameras zoomed in. People began speculating. Every smile, every glance was recorded and analyzed. By the time they returned to their seats, the internet was already exploding. Social media posts, trending hashtags, and rumors, all about them. People wanted to know if this was friendship, rekindled affection, or something deeper. Keanu didn't check his phone. He didn't care about headlines. But deep down, something inside him stirred. A quiet sense that fate was pulling old threads back together. Later that night, as the event continued, the host announced a surprise, an award for lifetime contribution to kindness and philanthropy. The room fell silent when Keanu's name was called. He looked shocked. Sandra clapped first, smiling proudly as he walked to the stage. He stood there for a moment, humbled. The applause echoed through the hall, but Keanu's words were simple. Thank you, he said softly. Kindness isn't something you show on stage. It's what you do when no one's watching. The audience went quiet. Every word came from his heart. He spoke of loss, resilience, and finding strength in compassion. And as he spoke, Sandra's eyes glistened. She remembered all the things that had made him different. The quiet heroism, the selflessness, the way he always saw good in people. After the speech, Keanu stepped off stage and returned to his seat. Sandra leaned closer, her voice barely a whisper. That was beautiful. He smiled faintly. You always said less is more, he replied. She laughed softly, but her heart was heavy. Something about his tone felt different, deeper, sadder, as if he carried a story he wasn't ready to tell. When the gala ended, they walked together toward the exit, cameras flashing again. Outside, the cool air brushed against their faces. For a moment, they just stood there under the streetlights away from the crowd. "It's been too long," Sandra said. "Yeah," Keanu replied quietly. "Maybe it was time." She nodded, and for a brief second, it felt like old times. Two friends sharing silence without needing words. But then, as a black car pulled up, Sandra noticed something strange in his eyes. A flicker of worry, of pain. "You okay?" she asked. Keanu smiled faintly. "Just tired. Long night." He opened the car door, paused, and looked back at her. "It was good seeing you again." "You too," she said, watching as he stepped inside. The car drove off slowly, leaving her under the glow of the city lights. Something in her gut told her this wasn't just a reunion. It was the beginning of something she didn't understand yet. As she turned to leave, her phone buzzed. A message popped up from an unknown number. She opened it hesitantly. The message read, "He's not telling you everything. Ask about the letter." Her heartbeat quickened. "What letter?" She looked back toward the street where Keanu's car had disappeared, her mind spinning. The city felt suddenly colder. She didn't know who sent it or what it meant. But one thing was certain. Something was hidden beneath tonight's calm reunion. Something that could change everything. The letter. The next morning, Sandra woke up with the sunlight spilling through her curtains. But her mind was still trapped in last night's moment. She couldn't shake off the feeling that something about Keanu's eyes had changed. They had always carried depth, a quiet sadness, a rare gentleness. But last night, there had been something else too. Something hidden. And now, that message on her phone refused to leave her thoughts. She sat at her kitchen table, coffee untouched, rereading the message again and again. "He's not telling you everything. Ask about the letter." The sender was unknown. No name, no picture, just those words. Her first thought was that it might be a prank. Hollywood had plenty of gossip, and people loved stirring rumors, especially when her name and Keanu's were trending again. But the more she thought about it, the more uneasy she felt. Keanu wasn't the kind of man who kept secrets, not from the people he cared about. Unless it wasn't about him, unless it was something he was protecting someone from. Sandra tried to brush it off and focus on her day, but her curiosity kept pulling her back. Around noon, she called a mutual friend, someone who had worked with Keanu recently. "Hey," she said lightly, trying not to sound too direct. "Have you spoken to Keanu lately?" The friend paused. "Yeah, a few weeks ago. He was quieter than usual. Mentioned he's been spending more time away from sets. Said something about taking care of personal things." "Personal things?" she asked. "Yeah, but he didn't say much more. You know how private he is." Sandra thanked him and hung up, her mind now restless. That phrase, personal things, sounded vague, but knowing Keanu, it meant something heavy. She took a deep breath and decided to reach out herself. She sent a short message. "Hey, it was nice seeing you last night. Maybe coffee soon?" Hours passed, but no reply came. Meanwhile, somewhere across town, Keanu sat in his small studio apartment, far from the glamour of Hollywood Hills. He had chosen simplicity long ago. No grand mansion, no unnecessary noise. On the table in front of him lay an old wooden box. He opened it slowly, revealing a few letters, faded photos, and one small envelope sealed with a wax mark. It was the same letter that haunted him every night. He picked it up carefully, staring at the handwriting on the front. Elegant, delicate, familiar. To Keanu, for when you are ready. It was from Jennifer, his late partner, the woman he had loved and lost years ago. She had written it before she passed, but he hadn't opened it. Not once. He couldn't. It was his last piece of her, and he wasn't ready to face whatever was inside. But lately, fate had been nudging him. The invitation to the gala, the unexpected reunion with Sandra, everything felt connected somehow. He had tried to ignore it, but seeing Sandra again had awakened something inside him. The past, the pain, the unfinished words. His phone buzzed, breaking the silence. A message from Sandra. He read it slowly. "Coffee soon?" He smiled faintly, though his heart grew heavier. Maybe it was time. Maybe he needed to stop running from the ghosts of yesterday. The next afternoon, they met at a quiet cafe tucked away near Sunset Boulevard. There were no cameras, no flashing lights, just two old friends sitting across from each other. Sandra watched him closely. "You look tired," she said softly. Keanu smiled gently. "I've been thinking too much." "About what?" she asked. He hesitated. "About the past." She leaned forward, her tone calm but curious. "Someone sent me a message last night. It said you weren't telling me everything. It mentioned a letter." For a long moment, Keanu didn't move. The air between them grew still. His expression didn't change, but his eyes gave it away. Pain, surprise, and a quiet acceptance all at once. "You got that message?" he asked finally. "Yes," she whispered. "What's going on, Keanu?" He took a deep breath and looked down at his hands. "The letter is real," he said quietly. "It's from someone I loved. She wrote it before she passed away." "I never opened it." Sandra felt her chest tighten. She remembered Jennifer. Remembered how deeply Keanu had loved her, how broken he had been after losing her. "You've kept it all these years?" He nodded. "It's all I have left." Her words, they scare me. Because once I read them, it's like closing the last door. Sandra's eyes softened. "Maybe it's not about closing the door," she said gently. "Maybe it's about finding peace." He looked at her for a long time, saying nothing. Then he gave a faint smile, the kind that held years of emotion in silence. "You always know how to make things sound simple," he said. They talked for a while after that, about life, loss, and how time changes people but never erases their humanity. For a brief moment, it felt like healing. But as they left the cafe, neither of them noticed the man sitting by the corner table, watching them closely. His phone buzzed and he whispered into it. "They talked about the letter. She knows now." That night, Sandra couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Keanu, about the way his voice trembled when he spoke of Jennifer. Something about the letter felt bigger than just a memory. She got up, walked to the window, and stared out at the city lights. Then a thought crossed her mind. What if the message wasn't from a stranger? What if someone wanted her to push Keanu toward opening that letter? But why? She picked up her phone again and texted him. "I think you should read it. Not for the past, but for yourself." "This time," he replied almost instantly. "Maybe tomorrow. I'll call you when I do." But tomorrow never came the way they expected. The next morning, Sandra's phone rang. It was Keanu's assistant, her voice shaking. "Sandra, something's happened." "He's missing." Sandra froze, her heart dropping. "What do you mean, missing?" "He left his apartment early morning. His car's still there. His phone was found on the street. The letter is gone." The world around her spun into silence. She gripped the phone tightly, her breath uneven. The letter was gone. Keanu was gone. And someone, somewhere, knew exactly why. The disappearance. The next few hours passed like a blur for Sandra. Her hands trembled as she tried to make sense of what she'd just heard. Keanu Reeves, calm, grounded, always composed Keanu, had vanished without a trace. His car was still parked outside his building. His keys were found on the kitchen counter, and his phone was lying near the sidewalk, its screen cracked. But the letter he had protected for years, was gone. Sandra sat in her living room, surrounded by the soft hum of city traffic, staring at the blank wall ahead of her. Fear pressed against her chest, not loud or panicked, but quiet and deep. The kind of fear that comes when something feels terribly wrong. She had seen Keanu handle loss, pain, and chaos before. He never ran. He never disappeared. This wasn't like him. By noon, she was on the phone with the police. She kept her tone steady as she explained everything. The last time she saw him, the conversation about the letter and the strange message she'd received. The officer took notes, promising to look into it, but Sandra could tell they didn't yet understand the weight of it all. To them, it was just another missing person report. To her, it was something far deeper. Something tied to grief, secrets, and maybe even danger. Later that day, she drove to his apartment herself. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with orange light that seemed cruelly calm compared to the storm inside her. When she arrived, the building manager let her in. His home was as she remembered. Simple, neat, quiet. Books stacked by the window, an old guitar resting in the corner, a half-finished cup of tea still on the counter. Everything felt frozen in time. She looked around carefully, trying to find anything that could give her a clue. On the desk near the wall, she noticed a notebook, one she remembered from years ago. Inside were sketches, notes, and lines from poems. But as she flipped through, one page caught her attention. It wasn't written in his usual calm handwriting. It looked rushed, uneven, as if written under pressure. It said, "If you find this, don't look for me. Some truths are meant to stay buried." Her eyes filled with tears. This wasn't him. Keanu never believed in running from the truth. Something was pushing him, or someone. Then she noticed something else. Tucked beneath the notebook was a folded piece of paper, smaller, older. It was a receipt from a small bookstore in Santa Monica, dated 2 days before the gala. Written on the back was a name, Matthew Hale. She didn't recognize it, but the handwriting was unmistakably Keanu's. Her instincts screamed that this name was important. By nightfall, Sandra was sitting in her car outside that very bookstore. It was a small place, quiet, with dusty shelves and warm yellow lights spilling through the windows. She walked inside, her heart beating fast. The man behind the counter, an older gentleman with kind eyes, looked up and smiled. "You must be Ms. Bullock," he said softly, as if he had been expecting her. She froze. "How do you know who I am?" He smiled faintly. "He told me you'd come." Her stomach dropped. "Keanu, when?" "Yesterday morning," the man said. "He came by early. Bought an old journal, paid in cash. Seemed troubled but calm. Before he left, he handed me an envelope. Said if a woman named Sandra ever showed up, I should give it to her." Her hands shook as he reached under the counter and brought out a plain white envelope. It had her name written in Keanu's handwriting. She held it carefully, afraid to open it, afraid of what she might find inside. When she finally did, there was a single page inside, no greeting, no explanation. Just a few haunting words. "If you're reading this, it means I couldn't keep running." The letter was never meant for me. It was meant for her son. "Find Matthew Hale." Sandra's breath caught. Her eyes darted back to the old man behind the counter. "Who is Matthew Hale?" she asked. He looked away, his expression heavy. "A writer. He used to come here years ago, worked with Jennifer before she passed. Disappeared around the same time she did." Her mind raced. Jennifer's son. The phrase echoed in her head. Was it possible? Had Jennifer, the woman Keanu loved, had a son he never knew about? Or had he known all along and kept it hidden? She left the store with the envelope clutched tightly in her hand. Outside, the city lights seemed colder than usual. The air carried the weight of something she couldn't yet see. Something big. Something buried. That night, she sat by her window again, staring at the note, rereading it under the dim lamp. Every line felt like a piece of a puzzle that was only now beginning to form. Keanu's message wasn't just about running. It was about protecting someone. Maybe a truth that could destroy the peace he'd built for years. She opened her laptop and began searching. Matthew Hale. Nothing relevant appeared at first. Just a few unrelated results. But then, buried deep in an old article from nearly 15 years ago, she found a mention. Matthew Hale, 8-year-old son of filmmaker Jennifer Syme, presumed lost in an accident near Big Bear Lake. Sandra's heart stopped. That couldn't be true. Jennifer never had a child, or so everyone believed. Had Keanu known all along? Had he kept it hidden because of grief, or guilt, or something even deeper? As she sat there trying to piece it together, her phone buzzed again. Another message from the same unknown number. "This isn't just about love. It's about what she left behind. You're not the only one looking for him." The sound of her heartbeat filled the room. She quickly typed back, "Who are you?" No reply. Then a moment later, a second message appeared. "Check the cabin at Big Bear Lake." Her hands went cold. She remembered that place. Keanu had once mentioned it years ago, a cabin he and Jennifer used to visit, far from the city, where they could escape everything. If that's where he had gone now, then the truth, the real truth, might be waiting there. Without hesitation, she packed a small bag, grabbed her car keys, and drove into the night. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, the wind whispering through the dark. As the city lights faded behind her, one thought burned in her mind. If Keanu had gone to that cabin, he wasn't just chasing the past. He was facing it, but somewhere deep inside, she also knew. She wasn't the only one heading there tonight. The cabin, the drive to Big Bear Lake, was long, dark, and silent. The headlights of Sandra's car cut through the thick mist that had rolled in from the mountains. The deeper she went, the quieter the world became. No traffic, no city noise, just the wind whispering through the pine trees. Every mile she drove brought back memories of Keanu's stories about this place. He had once described it as a sanctuary, a place where time slowed down. But tonight, it felt different. Like the past was waiting for her at the end of the road. It was past midnight when she finally reached the cabin. The small wooden house stood alone, surrounded by tall trees and pale moonlight. The windows were dark, and the only sound was the rustle of leaves. She parked the car, took a deep breath, and stepped out. The cold air bit at her skin as she slowly walked up to the front porch. The door was unlocked. Inside, the cabin smelled faintly of pine and smoke. Dust floated in the air, lit by the beam of her flashlight. It looked like someone had been there recently. The fireplace had ashes still warm, and a half-empty mug of tea sat on the table. Her pulse quickened. She called out softly, "Keanu?" No answer. "It's me. It's Sandra." Silence. She moved deeper inside, scanning every corner. The cabin was simple. A couch, a small desk, a few old photos on the walls. One picture caught her eye. It showed Keanu and Jennifer sitting on the porch years ago, smiling under the sunlight. The way he looked at her, it wasn't just love, it was devotion. Sandra felt a pang of emotion. She had seen that look once before, during their early years in Hollywood, when Keanu had spoken about Jennifer with a kind of reverence that words couldn't hold. She turned and saw something else on the table, an open notebook filled with new handwriting. Not Keanu's. The ink was darker, sharper. She flipped through the pages carefully. It wasn't a journal. It was more like a confession. The first page read, "You're closer than you think. But if you find him, ask about the boy." Before she could read further, a sound broke the stillness. Footsteps outside. She froze, her heart pounding. Someone was out there. She quickly turned off her flashlight and moved behind the wall near the window. A shadow passed by, then another. Two figures moving slowly toward the cabin. She held her breath, listening. One of them spoke in a low voice. "She's here. Keep the lights off." The voice was male, calm but cold. Sandra's mind raced. Who were they? How did they know she'd come? As the doorknob turned slowly, she slipped toward the back door, clutching her phone tightly. But before she could open it, she heard a soft creak behind her. A hand reached out from the dark and touched her shoulder gently. She gasped, spinning around. And there he was, Keanu. His face looked pale, his hair unkempt, his eyes tired. "It's okay," he whispered quickly. "It's me." She stared at him, tears welling up. "Where have you been?" "I thought—" He shook his head, motioning for silence. "They're outside," he murmured. "We can't stay here. Who are they?" She whispered. "People who think the letter leads to something valuable," he said. "But it's not money they're after. It's truth." Before she could respond, a loud knock echoed through the cabin. "Keanu," a voice called from outside. "We just want to talk." He looked at Sandra, eyes filled with urgency. "We have to leave. Now." They slipped through the back door quietly, moving into the forest behind the cabin. The moonlight filtered through the trees as they ran, the cold air cutting through their breaths. Behind them, the cabin door burst open. Voices shouted. Flashlights swept across the woods. After several minutes, they stopped near an old wooden bridge over a narrow stream. Both were out of breath. "What's going on, Keanu?" Sandra said, her voice shaking. "You disappeared." "You scared everyone. Then I find notes, strangers, and now this." He took a deep breath, looking away. "I didn't plan to disappear. I just needed time to think." But when I finally opened the letter, everything changed. She froze. You read it? He nodded slowly. It wasn't a love letter. It was a confession. Jennifer had a son before she died. His name was Matthew. She never told me because she wanted him to grow up away from this world, away from fame, attention, everything. Sandra's eyes widened. So it's true. The article I found, yeah, Keanu said quietly. The accident wasn't what people thought. Matthew survived. Someone took him in under a different name. But Jennifer's letter said there were people looking for him, people who wanted something she left behind. Something that could destroy reputations, maybe even lives. Sandra tried to process it all. So that's why you ran? To protect him, he nodded. Someone found out I had the letter. They started watching me, following me. I didn't want to drag anyone into it, especially you. She stepped closer, her voice trembling but firm. You can't protect the world by hiding, Keanu. You never could. You fight back by facing the truth. He gave her a faint smile. You always say that when I'm lost. Before she could reply, a flashlight beam cut through the darkness. Voices echoed in the distance again. They went this way. Keanu grabbed her hand. Come on. They crossed the bridge and followed a narrow trail leading up the mountain. After nearly half an hour, they reached an old lookout point overlooking the lake. The water shimmered under the moonlight. They stopped there, catching their breath again. Sandra turned to him. So what now? Keanu reached into his jacket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper, the original letter from Jennifer. I think she wanted me to find Matthew. Maybe to tell him the truth about who she was. Or maybe to protect him from those who still want what she left behind. Sandra's gaze softened. And what did she leave behind? He looked out at the water. I don't know yet, but whatever it is, it's not about money. It's about forgiveness. Before either of them could say another word, a voice shouted from behind. Stop right there. They turned. The two men from the cabin stood at the edge of the path. Flashlights pointed straight at them. One of them held a gun. Keanu instinctively moved in front of Sandra. You don't have to do this, he said calmly. The man sneered. We just want what's ours. You mean the truth? Keanu asked softly. The man hesitated. For a second, the tension in the air felt like it could break the world apart. Then a sound echoed, the sharp snap of a branch behind them. Both men turned quickly toward it. Keanu grabbed Sandra's hand again. Go, he whispered. They ran into the woods once more, hearts pounding, the sound of footsteps chasing close behind. As they vanished into the trees, Sandra glanced over her shoulder. She could see the glint of metal under the moonlight. One of the men raising his gun. A shot rang out. The world went silent. The truth revealed. The sound of the gunshot tore through the still night like a scream that wouldn't end. Sandra stumbled forward, her breath caught in her throat. Keanu grabbed her arm, pulling her behind a fallen tree. The echo of footsteps thundered closer, and the forest seemed to shrink around them. Everything slowed. The rustling leaves, the rushing water, the hammering of her heartbeat. For a second, she couldn't tell if anyone had been hit. Her trembling hands reached out in the dark. Keanu, are you okay? He didn't answer right away. Then his voice came, low and steady, though strained. I'm fine. Keep moving. But she could see the truth in his eyes, the flicker of pain, the way he held his side. His hand was pressed against his jacket, and when he pulled it away, it was stained red. You're bleeding, she whispered fiercely. It's not deep, he said quickly, trying to reassure her. Just a graze. But the blood kept spreading. Sandra's eyes darted around the forest. They couldn't stay here. They needed help. She spotted an old trail leading up the ridge, faint but visible under the moonlight. Come on, she said, wrapping her arm around him. We're getting out of here! Together, they climbed the rocky path, each step heavy with fear and exhaustion. The sound of their pursuers faded slowly into the distance. When they finally reached a small clearing, Sandra lowered Keanu against a tree. He winced but tried to smile. You always end up saving me, he murmured. Don't you dare joke right now, she said, her voice trembling as she tore a piece of cloth from her sleeve and pressed it against his wound. We're not done yet. You promised me answers. He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing through the pain. You'll get them, he said softly. But you have to listen carefully, because once you know, you can't unknow it. She nodded, her heart pounding. Keanu leaned his head back against the tree. The men chasing us? They're not random. They worked for someone close to Jennifer, a producer and powerful, connected. Years ago, she discovered something he was hiding, something that could have destroyed his career. She kept evidence, thinking she might use it someday to protect others he had hurt. But before she could, she died. Sandra listened in stunned silence. The letter she left me, he continued, wasn't just for me. It was her way of telling me where that evidence is. And Matthew, her son, is the key. She hid everything with him. Pictures, recordings, names, proof of what happened. That's why they want him, and that's why I couldn't tell anyone. The moment people knew, he'd never be safe again. The truth hit her like a wave. So Jennifer wasn't just trying to protect her son, she was protecting the truth. Keanu nodded slowly. And now it's on me. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small flash drive, its metal glinting faintly in the moonlight. This was inside the letter, he said. I didn't understand at first, but when I plugged it in yesterday, I found recordings, voices, documents, everything she'd uncovered. That's when they came after me. Sandra stared at it, her pulse racing. So that's why you disappeared. I thought I could draw them away, he said weakly. But they were faster than I expected. She pressed her hands tighter against his wound, her voice fierce now. You can't keep carrying this alone. We go to the police. We bring everything forward. They'll protect you. And Matthew. Keanu shook his head. It's not that simple. The people involved are powerful. The system might not protect anyone. But if we find Matthew first, we might have a chance. Sandra looked out at the dark trees, determination burning behind her fear. Then we find him, Keanu managed a faint smile. You always were stubborn. You taught me that, she said quietly. The wind rustled through the forest again, and for a brief moment, it felt like the world had paused. Then a faint sound drifted toward them, the distant hum of an engine. Sandra's heart leapt. Headlights flickered through the trees. Someone's coming, she whispered. Keanu struggled to his feet, leaning on her for support. They stepped cautiously toward the sound. A small Jeep came into view, stopping a few feet away. The driver got out, a tall man in his 30s wearing a dark jacket and a nervous expression. Sandra tensed. Who are you? The man raised his hand slightly. My name's Matthew Hale. The world went still. Keanu stared, his breath catching. The man's eyes, the same shade of brown as Jennifer's, looked back at him with quiet recognition. You're her son, Keanu said slowly. Matthew nodded. I know who you are, too. My mother told me about you, not in person, but in her letters. She said if anything ever happened, I should find you. Sandra stepped closer, her voice steady but urgent. People are looking for you. Dangerous people. We have to move fast. Matthew's jaw tightened. I know. They've been following me for weeks. That's why I came here. I found a hidden recording in one of my mother's journals. She said you'd know what to do. Keanu reached into his pocket and held up the flash drive. I think we have the other half of the puzzle. Before they could speak further, another noise broke through the night, the rumble of more vehicles approaching. Headlights flickered again in the distance, this time from multiple directions. Sandra looked around frantically. They found us. Matthew turned toward the lake. There's a boathouse down the hill. We can escape by water. They ran as fast as they could, the forest echoing with shouts and footsteps behind them. The cold air stung their faces, and the sound of engines grew louder. When they reached the boathouse, the small wooden dock creaked under their weight. An old motorboat sat tied to the side, half covered by a tarp. Sandra jumped in first, untying the ropes as Keanu and Matthew climbed aboard. Gunfire cracked in the distance. Wood splintered nearby. Keanu started the engine, his hands trembling but determined. The motor sputtered to life, and the boat lurched forward into the dark water. As the lake stretched before them, Sandra turned back to see figures gathering on the shore, flashlights glinting like stars in the fog. Hold on, Keanu said, gripping the wheel. We're not done yet. The boat sped through the mist, cutting across the black water as bullets splashed behind them. Matthew crouched low, clutching his backpack. I have something, he shouted over the noise. Something she wanted you to see. Keanu looked at him confused. What is it? Matthew pulled out a small, weathered envelope and handed it over. It's her last letter, addressed to you. She said you'd understand when you read it. Keanu's hands shook as he opened it. Inside were a few lines written in Jennifer's handwriting. Soft, elegant, filled with emotion. If you're reading this, it means you found him. I never told you because I didn't want you to carry my mistakes, but he's your family now as much as mine. Protect him, not with silence, but with truth. The world needs to hear it. From you. Tears welled in Keanu's eyes as he folded the letter carefully. The mist grew thicker, hiding the shore behind them. Sandra reached over, placing her hand on his shoulder. It's time to finish this, she said. He nodded. Together. But as they disappeared into the fog, one of the boats chasing them roared closer. A harsh voice echoed across the lake. You can't hide forever, Reeves! Keanu tightened his grip on the wheel, his jaw set. No, he murmured, his voice calm and steady. But I can make sure the truth doesn't die with me. The final reckoning. The fog hung thick over the lake, wrapping everything in silence except for the steady hum of the motorboat slicing through the dark water. Sandra held tight to the railing as Keanu steered through the mist. His wound was still bleeding faintly, but he refused to stop. Behind them, the pursuers' boats were still faintly visible, distant shadows that flickered like ghosts. Matthew crouched at the bow, scanning the horizon. His voice was low but firm. There's an old ranger station near the north dock. If we make it there, I can upload the files. Upload them where? Sandra asked. My mother left instructions, he said. She wanted the evidence to go public if anything ever happened to her. I found her plan hidden in a box last month. It includes a secure server, her contacts, and a timed broadcast. Keanu glanced at him. You mean she planned all this? Matthew nodded. She knew the truth would come out someday. She just didn't expect it to take this long. As the wind whipped across the boat, Sandra looked at Keanu, pale, tired, yet steady. Even through the pain, he carried the same quiet strength that had always defined him. You should rest, she whispered. He smiled faintly. I'll rest when it's done. The engine roared louder as they neared the northern shore. Faint lights appeared ahead, the ranger station. It was old, wooden, half-abandoned. Matthew jumped out first, helping pull the boat ashore. Keanu followed, moving slower now, his hand still pressed against his side. Inside, the cabin smelled of dust and rain. There was a desk, a cracked radio, and a small generator humming weakly. Matthew quickly set up his laptop, connecting the flash drive. Lines of code filled the screen. Once this goes through, he said, the files will upload to every major news outlet she marked, local, international, everything. Keanu nodded slowly. That's what she wanted. But before the upload could complete, the sound of engines filled the night again. Bright lights cut through the fog outside. They found us, Sandra whispered. Matthew's fingers flew over the keyboard. I just need one more minute. Keanu looked toward the door. I'll hold them off. You can't, Sandra said sharply, grabbing his arm. You're hurt. He met her gaze, calm, resolute. It's okay. This is where I stand. The door rattled as footsteps approached. Voices shouted outside. Keanu moved to the corner, picking up an old metal rod from the floor. His body trembled slightly from exhaustion, but his eyes stayed clear. When the door burst open, blinding light filled the cabin. Several men rushed in, shouting orders. Stay where you are! One of them barked. Keanu stepped forward slowly, raising his hands. It's over, he said. You won't stop this. Behind him, Sandra and Matthew stayed low, shielding the laptop. The upload bar was almost full. 92%, 93%, 94%. The leader of the group sneered. You think anyone will believe this? We'll erase everything before it leaves this building. Keanu shook his head faintly. You can't erase truth. The man raised his gun. Maybe not. But we can silence the messenger, Sandra screamed. No! But before he could pull the trigger, a siren wailed in the distance. Red and blue lights flickered through the trees. The men hesitated. Someone outside shouted, Drop your weapons! Police! Matthew hit the final key. Upload complete. The laptop chimed softly, a single sound that felt louder than the chaos around them. The gunmen turned to flee, but officers swarmed in through every side. In moments, the cabin filled with shouting, movement, and flashing lights. Sandra dropped to her knees, shaking, relief and disbelief washing over her. Keanu slowly sank against the wall, his strength finally fading. Sandra rushed to him. "You're okay," she whispered, pressing her hands against his wound again. "You're okay, it's over." He smiled faintly. It's finally over. Hours later, dawn broke over the lake. The chaos had calmed. The men were in custody, the files were confirmed to be real, and by morning, every major network was broadcasting the story, exposing the corruption Jennifer had uncovered years ago. Her name, once forgotten, became a symbol of courage. Keanu sat on the porch of the ranger station, wrapped in a blanket, watching the sunrise. Sandra sat beside him, her head resting lightly on his shoulder. Matthew stood a few steps away, talking to investigators, his expression a mix of relief and grief. "You did it," Sandra said softly. Keanu's eyes stayed on the horizon. "We did it," he said. "And she did too. Jennifer?" He nodded. "She wanted the truth to live. I just helped it find a voice." They sat there in silence for a while, watching the first light of morning spread across the lake. For the first time in years, Keanu felt peace, not the forced kind that comes from silence, but the real kind that grows from acceptance. When Matthew joined them, he handed Keanu a folded piece of paper. "I found this in my mother's old box," he said. "It was addressed to you." Keanu opened it slowly. Inside, Jennifer's words were gentle and full of light. "Keanu, if you ever read this, know that you were never meant to carry my pain. You were meant to carry hope. Tell the world that kindness is not weakness. It's the strongest thing we have left. And if you ever find our son, tell him his mother loved him enough to tell the truth." Keanu's eyes filled with tears. He folded the note carefully and looked at Matthew. "She'd be proud of you," Matthew smiled softly. "I think she'd be proud of both of us." Sandra watched them quietly, her heart full. "So what happens now?" Keanu looked out over the lake, the water shimmering under the golden sunrise. "Now," he said, "we live. We keep her light alive. And we remind people that truth, no matter how painful, is worth fighting for." The camera of time lingered there, on the three of them, framed by sunlight and memory, their faces peaceful, their journey complete. Later that day, news anchors across the world spoke his name not as an actor, but as a man who chose truth over silence. Headlines read, "Keanu Reeves helps expose Hollywood cover-up. Justice for Jennifer Syme." But for him, it wasn't about headlines. It was about closure. It was about love that had lasted beyond years, beyond loss, beyond fear. That evening, as the sky turned orange again, Keanu stood by the edge of the lake, alone for a moment. The wind brushed gently through the trees. He whispered, "We did it, Jen." A single tear slipped down his cheek, and a faint smile followed, not of sadness, but of peace. Behind him, Sandra called out, her voice soft but bright. "Hey, you coming?" He turned, nodding. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I'm coming home." And as he walked back toward her and Matthew, the last rays of sunlight broke through the clouds, warm, golden, and endless, just like the truth that would never fade.